Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be talking about Rangers and basically why every single Aeldari player out there needs to use at least one unit. And honestly, guys, they are pretty much in my book an auto include if you want to seriously compete in the current meta and in competitive play in general. Now, I know some people don't use Rangers and they have just as much, fun, playing, or they have just as high of a success chance, but I really do think a unit of Rangers in pretty much every list will help you win games because I know in my games they easily score me points or deny my opponent points pretty much every single game, right? They never do nothing. I will say that. So, without further ado, let us go ahead and dive into the why every Eldar player needs some Rangers. But first, a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at today. We're basically going to be doing a quick review of the stats, weapons, and special rules, get you guys reacclimated to the unit itself, look at their strengths and weaknesses, their combos and synergies, and how to use and position Rangers effectively on the battlefield on Tabletop Simulator. All right, let's go ahead and take a quick look at their stat line. So their stat line is very basic for Aeldari. They do have a worse save than Aspect Warriors and Guardians. They have the same leadership as Guardian units, which makes sense. However, they do have a 5+ invulnerable save against range attacks. So kind of like Aspect Warriors, they do come with that 5+ invul. However, they don't have any kind of bonus OC, and they're not a battle line unit. So they're not like Guardians where they do get OC too. Now, as for their ranged weapons, they do come equipped, of course, with sniper rifles. They are a sniper unit. The weapon itself has precision. It also has heavy if you stand still, but you're never really going to be standing still with this unit, so you're going to be hitting on 3s most of the time. Strength 4, AP -1, damage 2 is also not the best profile for a sniper rifle. Imperial sniper rifles, for some reason, have AP -2, and long rifles only have AP -1. Not sure why they chose to make that decision on the game design front, but it probably has something to do with the fact that these guys are a little bit easier to get, a little bit cheaper, and more plentiful. Maybe they didn't want that much precision in the game. They also come with shuriken pistols as a backup weapon. This is a good weapon because it has assault and it hits on 2s. So if you need to rush up to move block something and you're going to do an advanced roll while you do it, being able to shoot something is still better than nothing, right? You still get 5 pistol shots into the enemy. You might do 1 or 2 wounds to them. Who knows? Especially with Ballista Skill 2. As far as their melee weapons go, they're one of the worst units in the book. Same as Guardian Defenders, right? You get 1 attack, hitting on a 3+, strength 3, AP -0, of course, and damage 1. Not a melee unit. As far as their abilities go, they do have infiltrators and stealth and battle focus. This is really why you take the Rangers, is for their abilities, which make them a great utility unit on the battlefield. And then the coup de grace, the Path of the Outcast. So this ability is the same as it was in the Index. Once per turn, when an enemy unit ends a normal, advance, or fallback move within 9 inches of this unit, it can make a normal move of up to D6. This is very powerful, but it does have some limitations. For example, this does not prevent, or this does not allow you to move, I should say, if a model disembarks or deep strikes within range of your unit. So at the end of your opponent's movement phase, for example, if they want a deep strike within 6, right, if they have a 6-inch deep strike or something like that, you're not going to be able to make a move with this unit. Not really that big of a deal, but it can sometimes happen, so do be aware of it. Now, as for the unit composition, they're pretty cheap. You can get 5 of them for 55 points. This is the cheapest unit that is a multi-model unit in the entire, codex. You have Warlock Enclave at 55 points for 2 models, and of course you have the solo Warlock Skyrunner and Warlock on foot for 45 points. So as far as models to price, this is going to be the cheapest you can get. You can also take a squad of 10 for 110 points, and there's some wisdom to perhaps to taking a unit of 10 because you can spread farther along the battlefield, but also remember you do have to still maintain coherency. So this does cut a little bit of the distance off. And in general, I've found that I'm able to pretty much do exactly what I do with a 5-man unit than I would be with a 10-man. So in most cases, you're going to see 5-man units of these models. And for their keywords, they have infantry and their rangers and their Eldari. That's about it. They don't have anything special. They don't have smoke. They don't have grenades. And they don't have anything that's going to help them survive longer, right? They're pretty much what you see is what you get. So let's look at their strengths and weaknesses. So one of their biggest strengths is that they're cheap and expendable. And that's it. They're pretty much the cheapest bodies you can put on the field, model for model, and that's what makes them useful. On top of that, they also have infiltrate, so they can establish board control on your opponent, and that D6 reactive move makes them a lot harder to engage, which oftentimes in the first couple turns of the game can make these guys really annoying for opponents to deal with and can really give you the advantage. Having stealth and a 5+ invulnerable save makes them harder to fully wipe out at range as well. So after they get shot for the first time, if they do end up surviving, one ranger can usually with a battle focus token make it behind a wall and be safe from enemy shooting. Or you could just move onto an objective with it or move somewhere else where it's just going to be a real pain in your opponent's butt. As far as their weaknesses go, well, they don't do any damage. Now, I've heard people say they do negative damage. I don't really know what that term means, but they definitely don't do negative damage because that's impossible. Maybe I'm being too literal with that term, but the damage is very low, that's for sure. Now, sniper rifles will occasionally pop a Marine. They will occasionally pop a couple wounds on a character. I've, in one game, actually killed a Cryptek with these guys, but it was lucky. So don't expect that every game. They occasionally pop off, but not really. And on top of that, they have absolutely no survivability in combat. They basically don't get an invul in combat, and they don't get the -1 to hit in combat. So that's it. They're basically done, dead in the water if they get stuck in combat engagement. And there's some cases where they will absolutely get stuck in combat. And at that point, you just have to resign your rangers to death and hope that they brought a fierce enough enemy out into the open that they will trade up at that point. Okay, now for the moment in the video where I honestly kind of had almost nothing for this part of the video, and that's because Rangers are more of a gameplay type unit and they're less reliant on synergies. This is the kind of unit that you use to set up different things, and they're not necessarily benefiting themselves from these engagements. So they're often buffing friendly units by positioning them correctly and smartly on the battlefield versus any kind of, direct buffs, like a -1 to hit or +1 to hit or anything like that. They're not really doing that for your army. Having said that, Warhost does give them some bonuses that help them out a little bit, an extra inch on their battle focus moves, and Fire and Fade is also a pretty good tool for increasing their movement range as well. So if you, obviously don't have the movement to block a certain area of the board, Fire and Fade could help you with that. Now, they don't really benefit from anything else directly. Now, obviously, they're an infantry unit, so they can be targeted with a lot of stratagems, right? Like, I could target them with a lightning fast reactions if I wanted to. I could target them with go to ground if I wanted to. I can target them with several different abilities, but honestly, they're not worth it, right? It's not worth the CP to spend on a unit like this because their main goal is going to be to prevent movement, to prevent secondaries from scoring on your opponent's side, and stuff like that, right? They usually don't survive long. They're usually there for a good time and not a long time. Having said that, and this kind of gets into my main point, which will also go into the main point of this video, because Rangers are a very simple unit on paper. They don't look to have a lot of synergies, but experienced players will tell you that they are a vital part of the game. A lot of, kind of newer Eldar players will look at a unit of Rangers and be like, well, these guys suck. They're cheap, but they don't do any damage. How can I win a game if I take 2 Rangers where, 5% of my list is going to be completely useless in dealing damage? Well, they may not allow damage dealing themselves. They may not be able to do damage themselves, I should say. But what they do allow for is for your other units to deal more damage. Not because of the buffs that Rangers give, but because of the bad positions Rangers can put opponents in. So yeah, basically, clever play with Rangers can open up some big opportunities for you in the early game. And if your opponent isn't careful, usually what will happen is they will end up trading really down with a lot of the units that they use to kill the Rangers. So without further ado, let us go ahead and dive into our tabletop simulator example, where I will show you how to position and how to use Rangers on the battlefield, as well as a few tricks that you can try against your opponents. Alrighty guys, welcome to our tabletop simulator example, where I will be discussing the different ways to use Rangers in the early game. So the reason I say early game is because, as we all know, anybody who has used Rangers pretty much knows that they're not going to survive, right? They're a turn 1, maybe turn 2 unit at most, and they're definitely not going to make it past that unless your opponent is just playing in a way that is, befuddles the, chaos gods themselves, right? In just a completely insane way. So what that means is that we have to get the most out of these guys in the first couple of turns. So there's a couple of different ways to use them. Now, usually you're going to want at least 1 to 2 units of Rangers in your army. I actually think they're one of the auto includes for Eldar, especially right now because of kind of the meta that we're in and stuff. But the first way to use them is as a kind of a unit that is very unapproachable. So what I mean by that is giving your opponent no good decisions on how to engage this unit. And that's kind of how you want to play Eldar in general. They're not an army that wants to commit to anything just up front, right? A lot of Space Marine armies, when they commit to something, they commit to something because they really have no tricks up their sleeves on how to, get out of a hairy situation. They have their toughness and armor save, and that's about it. With Eldar units, especially units like Rangers, we have a couple of different ways out, and plus our army ability allows us some further options as well. Battle focus being that, of course. So in this scenario, let's say we have a unit of 5 Rangers. We're going to go ahead and infiltrate them in this position. By the way, this is layout number 5 on the GW terrain setup for, the June Balanced Data Slate, the June 2025 to 2026 map pack. And we're going to be doing a Dawn of War deployment. So enough of hammer and anvil. I've showed you enough examples on that. We're going to be doing a longer deployment. So we have our 5 Rangers spread out here. Now, there's several things that this unit is going to be able to do for us on turn 1. So first of all, when we infiltrate this unit, this should be your first drop. If your opponent doesn't take this spot away from you, this is where you should be dropping. If not, just drop to the other side. It's not that big of a deal. You can do a very similar thing on the other side of the battlefield. Now, your opponent's expansion objective is to our left, and the center objective is to our right. Your opponent is going to want to hold the center objective, but they have a little bit of a problem. These Rangers, as soon as our opponent moves to that objective, are going to be able to move wherever they want. D6 inches, right? Because of Path of the Outcast. So if our opponent moves up some assault intercessors, let's say our opponent moves them up, they're 6 inches right to here. Maybe they even do the advance and charge. They're in Gladius, of course, so they're going to do advance and charge. A normal movement can't get them there, right? Normal move of 6. So they're going to advance, and maybe they do an advance and charge. So let's say they advance D6, they get a 4. Let's just assume they get their 4 inches. And yeah, they're going to be approximately right here, right? Put him slightly back. Maybe he's like over this way. Now, your opponent has full control over this objective now. They have 5 OC on it, and you're not going to be able to out OC them. However, you also know that they can advance and charge. So, which direction do you think I'm going to move with my Ranger squad, right? Because as of now, if my Space Marine opponent wants to charge, it's going to be a 3-inch charge. All right, they're going to have to roll at least a 3. That's a very easy charge to make. So we want to make that a little harder for them. Now, this is roll dependent, but let's say they got an average advance roll. Let's say we roll average as well. This doesn't always happen, but these are the things your opponent's going to also have to think about. Because normally, if your opponent wanted to do something like this with Assault Intercessors, they want to kill something as well as take the objective, right? Or they want to do some sort of secondary mission, right? Now, they advanced, so they can't cleanse. We know that. They can't do, but, if they have extend enemy battle lines, they can do that as well. But they need to have control of that objective at the end of it. So, a couple of options here. Depends what you roll, but if you roll really high, there's a couple things we can do. Now, as you noticed, this Ranger's a little bit further back than the rest. This is on purpose, because this Ranger is actually the closest one to our Space Marine unit. And, oh, look at that, a solitaire in our deployment zone behind some terrain. Now, your opponent might not be thinking about this. If you have a unit of Howling Banshees, your opponent might not also think about that, because Assault Intercessors are cheaper than Howling Banshees, right? So if Howling Banshees come out and kill this unit, that's a trade-up for them. However, what's not a trade-up is Heroic Intervention. So let's say that we roll, we get our 4 inches, or maybe, I think, 4 inches is fine. If we get a higher roll, what we're going to do is we're going to move back towards the solitaire and prevent our opponent from being able to really charge at all, because we're just going to use the CP, we're going to heroically intervene, and we're going to kill all of those Space Marines, right? But let's say we roll a 4. What we can do instead is we can just simply do this, right? We can go sideways onto this objective. So, boom. And what this is going to allow us to do is put distance between these two units. Now, if our opponent wants to shoot at our Ranger squad and doesn't kill it in a single round of shooting, we can then use a battle focus token to move our models again. So either we can move them, depending on if they have more shooting or not, we can move them behind the wall, or we could just simply stay on this center objective. And this gives us an advantage, right? Because now our opponent's going to have to deal with that single or, 2 Rangers, 1 Ranger left on that center objective, and they may not be able to score certain objectives, secondary objectives, like, for example, area denial, right? Your opponent can't score an easy area denial turn 1 if you have Rangers near the center objective. So your opponent is going to have to clear these guys out. And a lot of times, your opponent is going to use more resources trying to clear out a 55-point Ranger unit to score their secondaries than they're comfortable with. And this is really where Rangers start to become very frustrating to opponents, because all of a sudden, again, they're using things they didn't want to use to achieve that goal. Okay, so we're here. Depending on what your opponent does, we may need to adjust our movement a little bit. But in that other case that I showed you guys, right, if we move 4 inches back here, maybe we roll really high, right? We roll like a 6. I know it's rare, but it does happen. And if you do roll even a 5, let's say, we go 5 inches back, right, which is right about there. I think that's a good position. Your opponent has an option. They can let these Rangers live. And if the Rangers live, guys, that's just another unit in your opponent's, it's a thorn in your opponent's side for the next turn. Usually your opponent's not going to just let them live. Sometimes they will, though. Just depends on the scenario. Or your opponent charges in. Now, let's say our opponent charges. They need an average roll. Yeah, it's a 6-inch either way, but they're going to have to come to these units, because notice that the closest model here, this is a 7, this is an 8.2. This is the closest model for some of these models. So let's say they roll their dice and they get a 7, an average charge, right? So they charge in, they get all up in there, right? And they have to base. They can't choose not to base if they can, right? So 7, 7. Again, they're going to get within range right here. boom. And then they just, they go on in, right? Now, again, a good opponent will just not charge you. But if you're going against somebody who, maybe doesn't notice, like just forgets that you have something like right here, or, thinks like, oh, I need to kill the ranger unit because I need objectives or whatever it is. Maybe they have, I don't know, maybe the primary objective is purge or something. No idea why they would go after this unit. But let's say they have to kill it for some sort of reason, right? You have a solitaire right here that can just heroically intervene, right? Boom. Actually, if we measure this out, this is exactly, I think, 6 inches. It's 5.4. So there you go. Your opponent had to move that way. Now, in a recent video I made with Shroud Runners, I had somebody in the comments mention that the opponent with a really good charge roll could, charge completely in the opposite direction. Yeah, I mean, if they had some sort of god roll, like a 12 or something like that, then they could, obviously charge over here. But that's not really expected. And I think the main point here is that your opponent's going to expect the average. Your opponent's not going to expect a 12-inch charge roll, right? If they get a 12-inch charge roll, that's also okay. Because check this out. If your opponent charges a 12 inches, you still actually come out ahead, because let's say they're over here now, right? Now, they're going to pile in, and they're going to get into base with who they need to get into base with, and they're going to wipe your ranger squad out. But guess what they failed to do? They've failed to consolidate back on the objective because they have charged too far. So, long story short, yes, they could make a god roll on a charge. It will get them away from the solitaire, but it won't help them recapture the objective, which was the point in the first place, right? If they draw extend, if they draw cleanse, if they draw any of those, first round objectives where they need to stay on the objective, they're not doing that. So they have to give up those secondary points. Of course, they could do it on other objectives, but you've kind of locked this down, right? You want to prevent your opponent from doing as much as possible within the first few turns. Now, they could do that, but let's say you roll really low, right? Let's say you roll like a 1. You're over here. All right, I think this was about the position, like right there. Let's say you roll like a 1. You roll really bad. So a good thing to do if you roll a 1 is force your opponent's hand, especially if they have a secondary objective that they need to complete on this point, right? So a fun thing to do is do something like this. Just move 1 inch there, and then move 1 inch there. Now, again, this prevents several objectives from happening. It prevents possibly area denial, right? If they can't shoot and kill every single ranger there, which they can definitely do, but they're going to have to reveal some units to do that, right? More than 55 points worth of rangers to be able to do that. Then they can't get area denial if they don't, right? Second, this unit that is cleansing is just now out in the open. It is ready for the kill, and you have a ranger on the objective. Which means if your rangers end up surviving, right, then they're going to be A-okay. They can actually capture this objective after you're done dealing with the assault intercessors. So again, it just gives your opponent some different problems to deal with, and depending on what they do, what their movements look like, you can adapt to the situation. So that's kind of the best position for the Rangers, just a very adaptable, very, kind of flexible position that they can put themselves in to mess with your opponent. Now, the second way to deploy Rangers, and of course, by the way, I know I didn't mention this yet, but this is assuming that you go second, right? I know in a couple of videos, people were like, hey, what if you go second? Well, that's a good point. This is kind of what you would do if you go second, right? You just kind of mess with your opponent's order of activation. You try to kind of make their choices a little bit harder on turn 1. Okay. So next we have this. So you'll notice this ranger is on the objective, right? So if we go here, we outline it. It keeps coming up, but you can kind of see he's towing the objective right here. The outline goes like this, right? So he's towing the objective, and let's say your opponent wants to assault your expansion objective and take out these rangers. Maybe they get overwhelming force, which again, overwhelming force is a common one that people draw. So they have a group of assault intercessors with jump packs. They move their 12 inches. They advance, they add that advance and charge. They get to like here, right? And their goal, again, is to kill this unit of rangers because they are on an objective. This is a great way to bait your opponent into a big mistake. Now, again, a good opponent probably won't do this. They'll probably let you get away with it, but that's fine. As an Aeldari player, you want to be as non-committal as possible. You want to get away with stuff, right? You want to put your opponent in a position where they allow you to get away with things because the alternative is bad, right? The alternative is their unit gets wiped out. So your opponent comes here and charges your intercessors, right? Let's just say they choose to go for it. They're like, you know what? I need to kill a unit. Maybe I can get enough damage in on this ranger unit, right? So they come in here, maybe they shoot some pistols at your rangers, whatever. It doesn't really matter. And then they charge in. I love putting a unit of Howling Banshees just right here, really close to these rangers. For the following reasons. 1, with an Autarch, they get a free heroic intervention. My Banshees are easily within 6. I mean, I know these aren't fully in position here, but 6 inches stretches out to here. And I have made sure that my opponent can't charge me through the wall, right? So if you look at the way I kind of positioned here, 1 inch if they were on the other side, they just wouldn't be able to engage the rangers through this wall. And then on top of that, they just can't fit their bases in there either, right? So they can't get to the other side. They have to go around, which means the Banshees are just going to kill them. And it doesn't matter if you lose a couple rangers to the impact attacks from the assault intercessors, the jump pack intercessors, because they're rangers. They're not very important. Whereas if they charge the Banshees directly, that would kind of suck. Now, if we take a look here and measure this, right? Let's say they roll a 16. From here, this is about 16 is right here. Oh, that's exactly where I put them. Okay, so they roll their 16 inches. They could choose to charge the Howling Banshees, and they could do some damage to them, but they'll probably still die in return because we have an Autarch here. We have the Exarch, right? We're going to strike first, and we're going to do a lot of damage. We can always put 1 mortal wound on the Exarch as our last mortal wound dealt, so we have more attacks into the activation. And so if our opponent does that, they're still not trading up, right? They're still not doing damage. And on top of that, they just lost their secondary objective, right? Which was the, whatever they had, which could be, gosh, I just said it, but overwhelming force, right? Overwhelming force. It could be extend, could be storm hostile objective, whatever it is, right? They've just lost it. Now, this position right here prevents your opponent from scoring multiple different objectives on turn 1 that they would normally easily be able to score. And here's the best part about it. Your opponent can't do anything about it. They have to spend CP to get rid of it, right? Another fun thing I want to show you. This can catch an opponent by surprise. So, in our original spot, we actually weren't on the objectives, right? We're about an inch away from the objectives. So, the cool thing about how overwhelming force is worded is if the unit started the turn in control of the objective, and if you kill a unit that started its turn in control of that objective, then you get 3 points. But if you use a reactive move to move on to an objective, that does not count. So we could basically set up a situation where we kind of bait our opponent into something like this, thinking that maybe they'll get some points out of it, and then we point out, actually, no, they didn't start the turn on the objective. Therefore, you don't get the points for it. I've had this come up in a couple games recently, right? The unit itself needs to start the turn in control of the objective. If they don't, you can't get overwhelming force on it. So just to reiterate, and I just want to show you guys because some of you guys will question this in the comments, so I'm just going to show you real quick. We're just going to flip through the missions here, and we're going to go to overwhelming force, and I'll show you the exact wording of it. Well, it just happens to be the last one, huh? Yep, it's God. Okay. So, it says right here, each time an enemy unit that started the turn within range of an objective marker is destroyed. Again, started the turn within range of an objective marker. So therefore, if you didn't start the turn in range, if you use in the movement phase the Path of the Outcast ability, you are an ineligible target for overwhelming force. So this can really screw with your opponent, right? So this is another little Eldar trick that you guys can use in your games. Again, if you're going against the best players in the world, they're going to know this and they're going to plan for it. But if you're going against your buddy, they might not expect that. And so when they draw overwhelming force and when they're doing all their stuff, they might just assume later in the turn, oh, you just gave me an overwhelming force. They didn't even notice it, and they might think they have the upper hand on you at that point. Maybe they don't say anything about it, but you know that they can't score that. Okay, so those are some of the things you can do with Rangers. I really enjoy Rangers. Going second is really more about denying secondaries and just kind of preventing your opponent from moving into certain areas of the board, right? Now, here's the kicker, right? If your opponent really needs to be move blocked, if you're going second, if they move up, you can, of course, use Rangers to close the gaps. It's not going to be that much, but if you know your opponent has, an extra move, like, for example, Thousand Suns can move again, choose a unit, move twice in the shooting phase. So they move in the movement phase, then they basically cast a ritual, and they can move again. Well, Rangers are great at stopping this, because if a unit moves up, within 9 inches of Rangers, they can move into the unit and prevent them from moving. So let's say this is a unit of Rubric Marines, and the goal of these Rubric Marines is to get from here, and they want to go right here. They want to get behind this line right here. Well, they're going to move 6 inches forward, or however, I think Rubrics move 6. Boom, right like that. And then you roll your d6. Let's say you get a 4. You move like this, 4 inches up. Uh-oh. Guess what? Rubrics can't move again, right? They're basically blocked off for good. And if they do it in the wrong order, anything that wants to move from this side of the wall over is now, they can't move either, right? So you've just basically screwed your opponent out of extra movement that they could have. Here's the other cool thing about it. They'll probably just shoot you and kill you, right? Absolutely they will, because they're Thousand Suns. They're going to just destroy that unit. But Rubric Marines are really expensive. That's the cool thing. So they're not like a cheap unit. They're not like scouts. They're pretty expensive, and they always have a sorcerer, an aspiring sorcerer, and a sorcerer attached, right? So this is a really easy way to kill them now. If you have Dark Reapers behind here, you have a Wave Serpent stuck behind here, and you have like 2 different firing lanes. By the way, if you guys are using Aspect Host or something, great place to put your Wave Serpent right here, so that you have lines of sight down this way and then lines of sight down this way, so you're covering basically the whole board with your Dark Reapers. And so then you just wipe these guys out easy. It's a free kill, right? You get, for 55 points worth of Rangers, you get more than 100 points worth of enemy units. Really easy trade. And Dark Reapers, they tend to stay alive the whole game if you play them right. So, you could do this multiple times in the game, not just with Rangers, but with things like Warp Spiders. I love moving my Warp Spiders across the battlefield in conjunction, like using Rangers as a first turn screen, and then using Warp Spiders to follow it up. It's a really good 1-2 punch that will just leave your opponent completely at a loss for secondaries and sometimes even primaries, depending on what kind of army they're running. Okay, now let's talk about going first. So, as a lot of people will have guessed, if you go first with Rangers, it is actually much easier to just move block, right? So, you just move them up, right? They move 7 inches. You could also do a battle focus token for ignore Overwatch or an advance. Now, these guys can advance up, right? Let's and have a battle focus token for +2. Usually, you know, I get about 9-10 inches on my advance. So maybe I'm like right here, right at the edge of their deployment zone. And that's kind of the perfect place they want to be because they're going to be blocking a lot of vehicle movement. For example, if we have a rhino that wants to move through here from behind this piece of terrain, they now cannot do that. They have to go the other way. So you've kind of locked down this area of the board. You've prevented your opponent from moving out with their vehicles. So again, Rhino wants to move through here. Nope, not going to be able to happen. So your opponent can't safely get behind these ruins and be in a harder position to get line of sight blocked. On the other hand, your opponent's going to have a really hard time getting behind this ruin because you have a model literally right here in the corner. So you're keeping your opponent away from the walls. This is really another important point. And the reason for that is simply whatever squad you have over here. Remember, we talked about this. And when you deploy, you don't have the option of, deploying after, unless you have a scout move. You don't have the option of deploying after you know where your opponent's got first turn or not. So now, if you carefully put one ranger right here, you could even move it even closer right here, your opponent's not really going to be able to snuggle this corner, which prevents a whole lot of things, right? If your opponent has a really deadly lone operative, like a Calidus Assassin, your Calidus Assassin can't just go after something over here, right? Your Calidus Assassin can't attack something, necessarily behind here because they're going to have to go around your rangers. They're not going to be able to position properly. So that is something that is really cool as well. Also, we were infiltrating right here, so the Calidus would have had to deploy normally in the deployment zone and then move up to this position. So that's another cool thing. All right. The other and last thing I'll talk about is Rangers are good for preventing staging. So if you don't need to move block your opponent, like let's say your opponent's a really fast flying army. I've gotten this question a lot. What if your opponent has fly? Well, the thing is if your opponent has fly, they're probably still not in a position to turn one charge you if you set up right, but they are in a position to stage really well. So your goal should then be, if you get first turn against an army that has a lot of flying melee like Blood Angels or regular Vanguard Space Marines, right, is you're going to have to block their screening and staging opportunities. So a great staging point for Assault Marines is right in this corner. All right, they love being in this corner. This is a great corner for them to be in, but they're also happy here. So if you just leave your Rangers there, there's not really much of a point to do that, right? So what we could do is we could just simply block our Blood Angel opponent from being able to hide in this corner, which means we have an easier time accessing their unit to shooting. So instead of like deploying all the way like this, we could just do something like this, right? Now we want to be far enough in here. Again, we would adjust accordingly, but we should have the movement to do it. We have a lot of room to do that with our Rangers. So we just do something like this, right? Now, at this point, they can't really stage well, right? They could charge into us, of course, but then they're right here. They're not in a good staging spot, which means that they're going to lose movement in the next turn. Also, they're not on the objective. They're going to have to use another unit to get there, which also means they're going to be in a worse, possibly a worse position. So let's say, they charge in, they kill our Rangers, and they're right here. This is their end spot, right? They kind of get to us. They charge in. They try to just charge these two models, but I don't know, maybe they have to charge a third model to get everybody in base. Who knows? I'm just going to assume they're just going to charge here. They kill our Rangers. Well, that's not a really good spot to stage. As you can see, they're on the terrain piece, but we can easily get line of sight to them, right? So an easy way to get line of sight is just right through here. We can see their base from over here, right? Jump Pack Sergeant is right there. So anything that we have hiding behind this piece of terrain or behind here, we can wheel around, right? If it's a squad of Dark Reapers, or, we have a unit of, I don't know what other long range unit we'd have that would shoot at them, but, we can basically pop them off, right? In the first turn. And we wouldn't have been able to do that if we didn't have this Ranger unit preventing them from getting a good position. This guy should be closer, right? Realistically, I think you'd have to charge like this, personally, but I don't know. Maybe they could have gotten maybe they could have gotten a wraparound or something. I don't know. But my point still stands, is that it's not exactly the best position for these guys to be in on turn 1. Okay, so that's another example there. And again, that's kind of not a precise, exact way of showing you guys how to prevent them. But as long as you're somewhere right here, they can't set up on you, right? They can't just be here and then have access to your whole army. Because if they're right here against the wall, they have access to your backline, right? 16 inches is a 4-inch advance. Very easy to do with Blood Angel units. And then guess what? All it takes is a 8-inch charge to get right here. If they want to get back into here, maybe a 9-inch. That's not impossible, right? Especially if they get a good advance roll. So preventing that from happening early is important. I have mentioned the screening to vehicles, and I went over this in my video where I talked about screening and move blocking. You guys can check out that video on my channel. It's been out for a while now. But essentially, it's going to be the same thing. You're going to block vehicle movement with these guys. You're going to be able to block monster movement with these guys. Now, the only thing you have to really watch out for with Rangers is efficient, cheap infiltrators. So my worst enemy as an Eldar player is units like these. Chaos Cultists. Units that have infiltrate or can get infiltrate, and then they can just infiltrate the same as your Rangers. Your Rangers are 55 points. Cultists are what? 50, 60 points. They're about the same cost. They have more OC than the Rangers do, and they can simply do this, right? They can simply walk onto the objective and do an action. They can charge your Rangers. If your Rangers move out of the way, it's fine because Chaos Cultists are cheap. So you're kind of losing your Ranger unit to an equivalent unit, right? Like Cultists, they're not going to necessarily kill the Rangers if they just shoot at them. But if they charge the Rangers, they definitely will kill them. And again, they still have control of the objective, and you don't really get a trade up because Cultists are cheap. These types of units are the units I hate. I hate really cheap infiltrators that are squads of 10 like this. And I just think they're a little bit too efficient, but that could just be my personal bias being an Eldar player, because Rangers are really fragile, and other infiltrating units don't really have to worry about Chaos Cultists. Like, if these are striking Scorpions, for example, they don't have to really worry about Cultists, because not only do they have stealth against shooting, but they're pretty beefy in combat as well. And Scorpions, even if a Cultist unit, and I'm not talking about accursed Cultists, I'm talking about regular Chaos Cultists that have infiltrate. If they charge in to a unit of striking Scorpions, they're hitting on 4s, they're getting about 10 hits, wounding on 4s, getting about 5 wounds, you'll probably lose 2 Scorps. And realistically, it'll only be 1, because again, you're going to put a wound on the Exarch, and then you're going to probably almost wipe the unit of Cultists, right? Because you're getting, 12 more attacks, plus the Exarch, that makes 16 attacks, with sustained hits, with AP values that are going to go right through their armor. So that's not really a big deal for Scorpions. But for Rangers, you do have to watch out for it, because Rangers are very fragile to this type of unit. So if you do see this type of unit on the battlefield, just think to yourself in ways of either one, staying away from it, or just putting your Rangers next to a unit that can take them out, right? Like Howling Banshees with an Autarch will be able to wipe most of these guys out and it'll be no problem, right? By the way, free kills are free kills. If your opponent wants to throw cultists against you over here and charge your Rangers with cultists, take it. Do the heroic intervention. It's worth it, trust me. It's worth it just to get rid of it in any case. Like, if there's ever an opportunity to get rid of an enemy unit fully in your opponent's turn, take that opportunity. It's going to reduce the amount of resources your opponent has. Okay, I think that's it for the Rangers. I think I showed you guys some pretty good tactics. Again, I think going first with Rangers is kind of easier for most people because you just throw them forward and move block with them. There's not much to it. But I think going second is really where people get a little bit miffed about Rangers. They're like, oh, well, they're not that, they're not that durable. They don't have scout. So if I put them out there in the open, they just die, right? And Scorpions have a scout move. So I can at least, if I don't go first, move behind terrain and stuff like that. But if you position your Rangers properly, you should get more out of them than Scorpions using a scout move and just playing safe, right? Because you're actively preventing your opponent from doing certain things. And by the way, this is a really cool deployment. Like, I actually like playing on Dawn of War, personally. It's one of my favorites. And it's just because it's so easy when you have a train piece right here, like for an Eldar player, right? You guys are worried about, usually, well, me included, we're worried about scoring primary, but we have a wall right next to a primary objective. I know the opponent does too, but it's so easy to just bait your opponent into going to the primary objective and you just have a unit right here with fights first, right? Like, this is a really funny thing. If we have a solitaire and we go like right here, and we're going against a combat-oriented army, and we have our Rangers, maybe we have some Rangers right here, right? Maybe we went, maybe we went like, maybe we went second or first, right? We went first, sorry, I don't know what I'm thinking. We went first, we moved the solitaire to here, and then our Rangers are just like right here move blocking stuff. Well, if our opponent moves forward and we move back onto our objective, right? We move our 4 inches or 3, whatever, to get back to the objective. They charge into us. Guess who we have waiting for the right moment here? The solitaire, right? Or the Howling Banshees or whatever it is, right? To just heroically intervene. Boom, right there. We got that heroic intervention. And then you just clean up and then you get this objective, right? So yeah, there's a lot of ways to use Rangers, I think, just as bait, move blockers, but also as a unit that forces your opponent to make hard decisions about what secondaries they want to play. Because again, sometimes it's not always about scoring your own secondaries. Sometimes it's about denying your opponent a secondary. Like, if you can make sure that your opponent can't score a certain secondary, like, that's a huge advantage. And by the way, with the new Cull the Horde mechanic, right? So I want to show you guys something else. I know this isn't really related to Rangers, but it's just an interesting tidbit, just so you guys know. If we go, hope it's somewhere here. Maybe not. It's got to be here somewhere. It is probably going to be the last one again, isn't it? Cull the Horde. There we go. Cull the Horde. You only need a starting strength of 13 plus on tactical objectives, right? What this means is that a simple Guardian squad, which has a starting strength of 11, with a simple Warlock Conclave in it, counts as a Cull the Horde target. Or if you have Eldrad and a Warlock in the unit, that counts as a Cull the Horde target because it's at 13 starting strength. I know some people don't want to spend that extra 45 points on a Warlock, but the advantages of the single Warlock in this case, I think, outweigh the disadvantages, which is it presents your opponent with a secondary that they can't freely discard. It also presents your opponent with a problem when they want to deep strike your backfield because you have a -2 to charge. We know there's a ton of, 6-inch range deep strike, and your guardians are usually screening the backfield with Eldrad, of course. That could be a pretty good combination of models. It is a little bit pricey, but we're fighting against Death Shroud Terminators. We're fighting against all these things that can deep strike and just tear our backfield apart. So maybe putting a -2 back in the backfield to charges is a good idea on top of, presenting your opponent with an objective they can't actually score. So, yeah, anyway, just talking about denying secondaries, denying opponent secondaries, but yeah, that's a really good way to do it. Okay, if I missed anything, if you guys have any cheeky kind of, little strategies yourself, let me know in the comment section. I probably didn't get all of it in one video. I kind of have to keep this video a little bit on the shorter side, at least under an hour is the goal here. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Let me know any strategies that you guys have about Rangers, and we will be back to the video in just a second. All right, everybody, we are back, and basically, yeah, in conclusion, Rangers are going to be one of the best units in the entire codex. Pure and simple. For reasons other than dealing damage. They can win games on turn 1 if your opponent can't answer them efficiently. So if your opponent has to use a lot more resources to kill them than they really want to use, or use more resources to outposition them, they're just not going to have a good time in the next turn, right? The Eldar, despite the rumors, can do a lot of damage, right? They're not the most damaging faction in the game, but they certainly can do precise damage in certain areas of the board because of our exceptional speed and maneuverability. And honestly, at 55 points, you can't really beat the value of this unit, right? A lot of the units that we rely on that are really good are also almost double the points of this unit. I mean, think about it. Warp Spiders are 95 points. Fire Dragons are 120 points, which are more than double the cost. So Rangers, comparatively, are super cheap. And lastly, they do look really cool. They are a really cool little nifty unit, and it's awesome to use them on the battlefield. Really, I have a unit myself that I really enjoyed painting. They're a little bit annoying to paint at times, but once they're fully painted, they look really cool, and they're just really fun to use. So yeah, I definitely recommend that you guys, all Aeldari players, run at least one unit in your army and use them in the way I described. I think you'll get a lot out of them. All right, guys, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. I have been a little bit more active than it seems. I know I haven't uploaded a lot of stuff, but I've been working on quite a few interviews with different people, and I've been working on this video as well for the last couple days. So yeah, hopefully just bear with me and there'll be more content to come soon. If you guys have supported the channel, or, are subscribers, or you're just watching my videos on a consistent basis, I just want to give you a thanks for, supporting the channel. If you do want to support the channel a little further and become a Patreon member, I do have free trials activated, which will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is, of course, a great community filled with Eldar players and enthusiasts who love talking about strategies, tactics, and, of course, hobbying. In addition, I am putting up every single one of my videos from now on Patreon, free of ads for every single paid member. So paid membership starts at $3 a month, very cheap price, and you get ad-free videos, so you don't have to worry about all that YouTube nonsense. I know that in some of my videos, they go for about an hour long, and you just get bombarded with ads. I watched one of my own videos the other day, just to kind of a little bit of a self-critique on my own, delivery. And wow, I got bombarded with ads because I don't pay for YouTube Premium or anything like that. And I can't even imagine how you guys feel about that. So started putting my videos for, ad-free on Patreon for those members who, are paid members, essentially. Also, I do have a channel store page and an Amazon affiliate link that you can grab Eldar inspired apparel on the channel store page. Basically, basic runes, little, Eldar kind of things, Eldar inspired things. Check that out if you want. pretty cool. Sometimes I'll have them on the recommended in the, video itself. And lastly, if you want to grab some discounted Eldar minis, there is always Amazon. So thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.